Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about boundary setting. Now, this is something so important for everybody, but if you're an empath, then it's highly likely that you either had to learn how to set your boundaries, you either had to learn the hard way about the importance of boundary setting, or you have yet to learn it. Now, I can speak for myself when I say that this is definitely something that I really have to focus hard on implementing, and it took me, and I'm still learning, but it took me quite a long time to realize how important it is for me to protect my energy by setting boundaries. And mind you, I'm still learning this. I'm not quite there yet, but I do have some steps that you can take to figure out exactly where your boundaries are being crossed. Perhaps you don't have boundaries in place where there should be boundaries, and there are signs that you can look out for that will indicate to you where you're allowing people to cross your boundaries, and where you need to implement boundaries. So let's get right into that. As an empath, you will be somebody who is constantly tuning into the emotions of others, right? People who are non-empathic, or people who aren't as empathic as a true empath, they are able to have a strong sense of self. They're able to set boundaries for themselves because they know where their energy field ends and where somebody else's begins. But as an empath, we tend to, rather than having boundaries, we tend to have antennas going out and constantly picking up how other people are feeling, what other people need. And while that is a massive strength, it can also be a weakness if we don't learn how to contain our sense of self, how to set boundaries for ourselves so that people don't overcross our energy field, so that people aren't pushing our needs aside or taking advantage of our givingness, right? And having personal boundaries is really, really, really necessary to create a strong sense of self. But what you'll realize with a lot of people who are highly attuned to the needs of others, people who are highly affected by the energies around them, is at some point in their life, they were taught that they need to tune into other people's needs in order to receive validation. And that's why a lot of us empaths can be classified as people pleasers, and it can be really rewarding, right? Wanting to help people, always tuning into other people, but it can also be very destructive because we can very easily be taken advantage of. We can very easily be manipulated to benefit somebody else. And to ensure that that does not happen and that you're choosing wisely where your energy is going, you need to learn to tune in to when your body is saying no to something. Whenever you actually don't want to do something and you're doing it for the benefit of somebody else when it's not truly benefiting you back. And that leads us on to the first step of boundary setting. In order to identify our boundaries, we need to first identify how our body responds whenever our boundaries are being crossed. And what you'll come to find is that often shows up as resentment, right? And it may not be very obvious resentment, but it may be somebody asks you to do something for them, and inside you're kind of saying, F you, or like you're kind of thinking like, oh, why do I have to do this? Why did I agree to this, right? And that resentment is your body communicating to you through your emotions that you actually didn't wholeheartedly want to do that thing, that you're not benefiting from it, that you feel like it's not serving you, okay? So the question comes down to, why do you agree to it in the first place if you don't wholeheartedly want to do it? That comes down to the people-pleasing characteristic that many of us empaths have built into us. But that resentment is going to be the key to you setting boundaries for yourself. So we can really use that resentment as a communication, because that's exactly what an emotion is. It's a sensory communication of what is going on subconsciously, what is going on in your subconscious mind regarding something. So step one for setting boundaries for yourself is to write down a list of every area of your life, every aspect of your life that brings up any resentment in you, right? So write out a list of, your work, anything to do with your work that you feel resentment towards. And don't be afraid to get specific, because the more specific you can get, the closer you're going to get to identifying exactly where that boundary is being crossed. So look at every aspect of your life. Look at your relationships, look at your family, look at your hobbies, maybe what you do in your free time. Maybe you're a part of sports clubs or part of a knitting club. I don't know what you like to do in your free time, but really look at every aspect of your life, even just your home life. Maybe you're taking on too many house chores and nobody else is bothered to help you with the chores. So that might be a boundary being crossed for you, that you have to do way more house chores. You're always doing the dishes, you're always doing the vacuuming, you're always doing the cleaning, and nobody else is helping you with that. Maybe that's a boundary being crossed that you're not expressing, and you feel resentment when you're doing those chores because you're getting the short end of the straw in that situation. So write down as many things as you can think of that bring up this feeling of resentment in you. And once you've done this, that brings us on to step 2. So now I want you to really start contemplating where you need to say no. Where do you need to say no more? Where do you need to express that this is too much, that this extra time that you're putting into your work is pushing you too much and you don't want to do that extra time? Or maybe you want to express to your wife or your husband that you don't want to do all the chores because it's actually too much for you and you don't have enough time to yourself. Therefore, your boundaries being pushed or being crossed. And that brings us on to step 3, renegotiate your commitments. And to renegotiate your commitments, you need to learn how to communicate assertively to those around you. And I feel like that is where I personally struggle the most. As a people pleaser, it's very easy to fall into this either passive communication habit, where if somebody asks us to do something or somebody tells us off for something, we fear standing up for ourselves, okay? Because we don't want to disappoint that person. We don't want this person to dislike us. So passive communication will be kind of like brushing off our needs, kind of just, looking away and saying, yeah, okay, I'll do that, yeah. And ignoring and not expressing what you really need. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where you might get triggered and you might have a reaction, an emotional reaction, and that's also not a healthy way of communicating, because people aren't going to understand your boundaries if you're not able to communicate calmly. So it all comes down to assertive communication. If you're going to your boss and you want to tell him that you don't want to work over hours anymore because it's too much for you, then going in a big state all worked up is not going to be effective. And in the same way, not saying anything and just letting that resentment build up is also not going to get you anywhere. So it's all about assertive communication. And I'm definitely going to make a separate video on assertive communication because that is a whole other topic in itself. But that's really, really, really key to expressing your boundaries. It's how you communicate to people. So when you've identified how it shows up in you emotionally, when your boundaries are being crossed and you have identified the boundaries that are being crossed or don't exist in you that need to exist, and when you have communicated or re-established those boundaries, then you should be well on your way to gaining a clearer and stronger sense of self. Because whenever we have boundaries in place, our energy is first tuning into our own needs, and then we can reach out to others. As empaths, we are often constantly putting our wee antennas out and constantly tuning into the needs of others, when really we should actually first tune in to our own needs, and then we can wholeheartedly and freely and willingly give our attention and energy to other people. Now, what you might notice whenever you go from being the person who's always saying yes, who's always agreeing to everything, always willing to take on that extra work, who's always willing to help out with X, Y, and Z, what you will notice whenever you start to become the person who says no, people are going to backlash. People are not going to like it because it obviously benefits them if you're always saying yes, if you're always down to go out at the weekend, even if you don't feel like it. If you're that friend who people know is always going to be willing to come out with a bit of persuasion, then people are going to push back when you set your boundaries because they're going to be like, no, she always says yes. She's always the person that agrees to things whenever I need help. So expect people to push back in the beginning, right? Because you are re-identifying yourself. You're showing up as a different version of yourself. You're showing up as somebody who puts yourself first when before you were always putting other people first. But if you stand your ground and you stay assertive in your communication and you're clear with your boundaries, eventually people will adapt to that and people will begin to respect you. And you'll feel like it's going to be so much easier to just say no and not feel guilty, to tune in to what you need. And that is my very last tip. Before saying yes, take the time to think about it, take the time to really contemplate whether the thing that you're being asked to do is gonna give something back to you in return, whether it's gonna benefit you in some way, and whether it's aligned with your purpose, and whether you actually have the time and the energy to put into this thing, whether it's gonna benefit you as much as it's gonna benefit whoever you're helping out. And that's not me saying that you should stop helping others if you're not gaining something back, but if it's not giving you energy by giving to them, if you don't feel good about yourself after doing that because you actually had to focus your attention on something else and you really had to get a project finished and now you're stressed because you felt so guilty that you had to help this person, then it's not really paying off for either person because you're going to show up with that resentment and that person will likely pick up on that you're not wholeheartedly there, and also you're going to be inconveniencing yourself and putting more stress in your own life. So guys, that is it for boundary setting. This is a really important one. I really urge you to put this into practice because it is a life changer. If you are a people pleaser, if you are highly empathic, I really encourage you to put these steps into practice. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the subscribe button below. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it beneficial. And if you think somebody else might benefit from it, go ahead and share it with them. I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Have an awesome day.